Hello YouTube, what's up? I'm Darkraider, and today I'm going to show you how to do the in-game setup and show you some of the basics of the Immersive Railroading mod. In the previous episode I showed you how to install the mod and add-on packs into the file directories. And today I'm going to be showing you some of the in-game setup and some of the basics. So, if you look in our inventory, we have a couple new tabs in the creative menu. We have our components, we have our passenger cars, our rolling stock, and our locomotives, as well as our general items. And under the locomotives, you'll notice there's just these that are installed by default with the mod. But we installed that contact pack yesterday, so to enable that, we go into our options, resource packs, and this is the one I installed yesterday, the heavy industrial pack. And now I'm going to load that pack, and when it finishes loading, I'll be right back. Alright, so our pack is finished loading, so if we go back into the inventory, you can see now we have some new locomotives. But for now, I am going to use this as an example of diesel locomotive, and I'm going to grab K4 Pacific as a steam locomotive. So, what we have here is our track blueprint. This is going to be the basic way that you're going to place track. And by right-clicking this in the air, you can see we have some options here. You can set whether it's a straight track or a crossing, a slope, turn, or a switch, or even a turntable. But I'm going to keep this straight. And you can set the length or radius depending on whether it's a straight or a curve. Rail bed is going to be whatever ballast material, and this is purely aesthetic. Railbed fill is going to fill over in case you have any gaps, you can fill them in with this type of block. Position is going to set whether it's either fixed to the nearest block, or if it's pixels, it's the nearest pixel, and if it's smooth, then it'll allow you to place it anywhere. Direction is, if it's a switch or a turn, it'll select left, right, or flexible means you can change the direction by looking at the left or right half of the block. And we have multiple gauges. We have our standard gauge, we have narrow gauge, Minecraft gauge, which is 1 block wide, model gauge, which is super tiny and really cute, and Brunel gauge, which is like an Eastern European Russian wide gauge. So that's that. So I'm just going to show you placing these down. Here I have a switch, and this switch I have it set to flexible, so you'll notice it can either be placed to the right or to the left. I'm going to place it to the left to join up with that other switch there. And I'm going to take my straight track, and I'm just going to plunk that right down there, and you'll see, just look at the block and I'll place it out given that length that you fed it earlier. Alright, so now we have this K4 Pacific. This is a steam locomotive, and I'm going to show you the process of firing the steam locomotive. In creative mode, you can place it down, you'll see it'll build it all at once like that. And we're going to need some items here. We're going to need water, and we're also going to need some kind of fuel. For now, I'm going to use coal. So we're actually going to need a lot of water buckets, but since I'm in creative, I can do this. So you'll see that we have an inventory slot here. This inventory slot is where we're going to put our water. Now note that for a steam locomotive, we actually are going to need to have lots of water, and you want to make sure that the locomotive doesn't run out of water while there's still active fuel inside it, because that'll actually lead to boiler explosions. And we don't want locomotives just exploding, so make sure that you put the water in first, and the water is just always in the locomotive. And if you're going to leave your locomotive idling for a while, I would definitely recommend that you turn off the fuel supply by just removing it from the locomotive entirely, or else you do risk it exploding while you're not attending it. Alright, so we're almost done filling this fuel here. And one more bucket and it should be finished. There we go. So that's our locomotive full of fuel. Let me just dispose of those items. Or full of water. if we open it again, we have all these slots. These slots can be filled with fuel, so I'm actually just going to use a creative mode, middle click, and fill those all. Actually, we don't need all of them. Now that those are burning, I'm only going to put like 1 or 2 slots in so I don't forget about them. And I'm just going to get rid of these here real quick. Alrighty, so you'll notice that down on the bottom left we have these GUI gauges. So what you'll see is that we have on the left most of the screen one that's blue, and that's indicating how much water is in the locomotive. Now we want to keep that bar above 75% full. The middle gauge is reading out steam pressure, so right now it's 0 psi because the water hasn't boiled. The rightmost gauge that's rising with orange is actually our fire temperature. So right now you can see that the flames for our boiler are currently around 20 degrees Celsius, but of course water boils at 100, so we won't start building steam pressure until that reaches 100. So I'm actually going to hop out of this locomotive with left shift, and I'm just going to leave that there to warm up. Now there are also diesels available, and I am going to place down this diesel same way as I did the steam locomotive. Just look at the track, right click with the diesel in hand, and I will be right back while I get my inventory set up. And I am back. So with the diesel, just like before, we can jump into it right clicking on it, and if we right click again we will get an inventory. Now a diesel can take any number of fuels, so if you have other mods installed you can use the fuels from that, but in Immersive Engineering, which is one of the dependencies, you get options for ethanol like this, and also you can use another fuel called biodiesel, and that's also in the mod. Now I will show you that creosote oil does not actually work, so it won't take creosote because it's unrefined, but it will take biodiesel or ethanol. So you'll need to have a pretty stable refinery enabled or creative mode. I am going to actually grab a little bit more fuel just so we can run this a bit longer. So what's different about Immersive Engineering is how the locomotives are operated. So instead of using your WAS and D, because those are used to move around the cabins, you actually have to use your number pad. So by pressing the number 8 key on your numpad, it'll increase the throttle. 5 will set the throttle to 0. 2 will reverse the throttle. And the brakes are operated with 7 to increase, 4 to set to 0, and 1 to decrease. And to operate the horn, it's just the enter key. So while I'm waiting for the steam locomotive to warm up, I'm just going to drive this diesel a bit. But what's cool about the locomotives is you can set them going and actually leave them, and they'll kind of do their own thing. So that one will just zip around our little test track. I'm going to check back on this now, and you'll see we're still at about 35.2 degrees Celsius. So let's actually spread this around a bit. That way it's not much coal, but it's spread around so all the boilers are going to be working at once. So I can get set up to show you the process of coupling. So to couple train cars, I'm just going to grab a TTX flat car. I am going to go over to this locomotive and bring it into the station area, or our little work area, by accelerating it in. And stop. So if I go behind the locomotive, there are some ways to couple cars. When placing it, if you get closer than the car length to the locomotive and place it down, it'll automatically shoot the car back and couple it. So now it is actually coupled to that locomotive. The other way is actually by backing into the locomotive, or backing into the car. So you'll notice those ones are spaced quite far apart. But I can get into my locomotive, and I'm going to go into F5 mode because that makes it easier to kind of see what you're doing. And I'm going to walk over to this side. Oh, you can walk between the cars, so you have to be a little bit careful of that. And now if I back the locomotive in, it'll actually couple to that car, and now all of these cars are moving together. That's pretty much how it works to couple. Now to uncouple, it's a little bit unusual and a bit counterintuitive, so you're going to need this tool called a coupling hook. Now with the coupling hook, you're going to want to go up to the coupler joint you want, and I'm going to set it so that this car will become uncoupled. So you'll notice if I just right click on it, it'll say front coupler is coupled to ATTX flat car 1, which is this one. So to uncouple that, I'm going to shift and right click, and you'll see coupler front is set to shunting mode. Now if I right click, you'll see it's decoupled in shunting mode. What shunting mode means is that the coupler will be able to be pushed by other cars but will not actually connect to them, so you can bump into other cars for shunting. So now if I hop into the locomotive and drive it forward a bit, you should see that it leaves that flat car behind, and you can see we've done that right there. That's great, but how do we pick these up? So to actually pick up a flat car, we need to shift, and we need to left click to break it. So by shifting and punching it, you can pick it up and it'll drop an item. A very neat feature of this mod actually is that you can do villager fares. So if I just take this Pennsylvania Railroad Pullman, I'll take a couple of them, I can place them. So with passengers, like players, you can actually just click on it to get in the car, and you can actually walk through it, and you can walk between cars. So that's a really neat feature that you can go from car to car. But also, if you have villagers around your world, you can use this conductor's whistle to set any number of them in a specified radius. By default it's 50 to get into the train. So now of course there's villagers in your train, and for every 1,000 blocks that you travel away from the start point before you dismount the villagers, they will pay you in emeralds. So now that we have all these villagers in the train, to get them out again, we need to shift and just right click the whistle again, and those villagers jumped out. Actually, that's interesting, I got paid in emeralds anyway. So that's pretty much how to get villagers into and out of your train cars, just using that conductor's whistle, and that's added by the mod. Now I have lots of emeralds. So that's the basics of running those types of locomotives. Now this one you'll see has just reached 100 degrees Celsius, and now the boiler is actually starting to pressurize with that second gauge from the left side. And as that pressure rises, you'll be able to do more, and of course the locomotive will consume pressure. So if I open the throttle now, actually I'm going to set the switch real quick first, just so I don't have an accidental derailment. So with the switches, you'll see there's a long tie here. Place a lever by it or some kind of redstone signal, and you can change the position of the switch. And I'm going to set both of these so that I have free passage. Now I should be able to hop into this locomotive and drive it. You'll see that it takes a little while to get spooled up because, of course, as a steam locomotive, it does take a little bit more oomph to get started. And I'm going to go into F5 mode so you can actually see what's going on here. And of course, if you have a tender hooked up immediately behind the locomotive, it'll actually take its fuel and water resources out of the tender and use those to supplement its own inventory. So now you can see, because I've set that switch, this locomotive should start following to the left and join onto the main line. Of course, the locomotive will get a lot faster once you have higher pressures. So right now this locomotive is very slow because I'm running at a very low pressure. But if you let that pressure build up, and you'll notice when I stop the locomotive it starts building the pressure again, it will actually go up to a much higher speed. But of course, steam locomotives, while they do look cool, do take a lot longer to fire up because it has to wait for that temperature to rise and then the pressure to build. Whereas with a diesel engine, you can actually just drop in fuel and it's ready to run immediately. Currently, electric locomotives are not in the mod, but they are planned for version 2.0. So that's it. That's pretty much the basics of just getting trains into it, loading your add-on packs, just placing your trains and running them around in a creative mode setting. So now that we've covered that, in the next episode I plan to cover a little more of the advanced parts of the mods, and I hope in this series I will be able to get into modeling and importing custom models of your own into the game. But for now, thank you and happy railroading.